Tomorrow morning, before you touch your phone, I want you to notice something. Your hand will probably reach for it almost automatically. Don't stop yourself yet. Just notice how fast it happens. That's your brain running yesterday's program. We're going to change that. Have you ever noticed that some people seem to get things done without constantly forcing themselves? In this video, we're not looking at common productivity tips. We're looking at 7 subtle morning habits that quietly teach your brain to make better decisions with less effort. They're simple, practical, backed by psychology, and most people have never thought about them this way. Let's start with one that completely changes who controls your attention every morning. Habit 1. Don't borrow your first thought. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning. Before you've even sat up, you check your phone. An email reminds you about work. A news headline talks about another crisis. Someone on social media announces an incredible vacation. Another person shares an opinion that annoys you. Within 30 seconds, your brain is already thinking about things you never chose to think about. The interesting part is that none of those thoughts actually belonged to you. They were borrowed. We rarely notice this because it feels normal. But from the moment we wake up, many of us hand over the steering wheel of our attention before our own mind has even had a chance to wake up. Psychologists have known for years that attention is limited. Every piece of information you consume competes for mental space. Once something captures your attention, your brain keeps returning to it even when you'd rather focus on something else. Think about the last time you read a frustrating email first thing in the morning. Did you simply read it and move on? Probably not. You replayed it while brushing your teeth. You thought about it in the shower. You imagined different responses. A 30-second email quietly occupied 30 minutes of your brain. Now imagine replacing that first borrowed thought with one original thought. Before looking at any screen, ask yourself a simple question. What's one thing I genuinely want from today? Not what your boss wants. Not what social media wants. Not what your inbox wants. What do you want to make happen today? It doesn't have to be profound. Maybe you want to finish a chapter of a book. Maybe you want to finally start a project you've been avoiding. Maybe you simply want to have more patience with your family. That single question does something surprisingly powerful. It reminds your brain that your attention belongs to you first. The world will always have demands waiting for you. But there's a noticeable difference between responding after you've established your own direction and reacting before you've even found it. And that leads to another habit that's surprisingly good at changing how your brain handles obstacles. Because successful people aren't necessarily better at avoiding problems. They're better at removing tiny sources of resistance before those problems grow. Habit 2. Remove one tiny friction. People think success comes from adding more. More habits, more goals, more productivity apps, more planners. But if you watch highly organized people closely, you'll notice they spend just as much time removing obstacles as they do adding new systems. Think about your own home for a moment. Maybe your phone charger is always tangled. Maybe your keys never seem to be where you expect them. Maybe your desk is just cluttered enough to make starting work feel slightly annoying. None of these things seem important. Individually, they aren't. But your brain experiences them as tiny moments of friction. Behavioral scientists often describe behavior as a balance between motivation and effort. Even when you're motivated, unnecessary friction quietly reduces the chance that you'll follow through. Now imagine removing just one tiny annoyance every morning. Tighten the loose cabinet handle you've ignored for months. Throw away the pile of junk mail sitting on the counter. Delete the 50 screenshots you'll never look at again. Untangle the charging cable. Refill the printer paper. None of these actions will change your life today. That's not the point. The point is what they teach your brain. Every time you eliminate a small source of friction instead of tolerating it, you reinforce a subtle identity. I'm someone who fixes problems while they're still small. That's exactly how successful systems work. People often imagine successful lives as the result of dramatic breakthroughs. More often, they're built on hundreds of tiny annoyances that never became bigger problems because someone dealt with them early. Here's something interesting to try. Tomorrow morning, walk around your home asking one question. What's the smallest thing making my day slightly harder than it needs to be? Then fix it. Not tomorrow, not this weekend, then and there. You might be surprised how satisfying that feels. Not because you've accomplished something huge, because you've trained your brain to stop stepping over problems. And speaking of questions, The next habit is one of the most overlooked ways to improve your thinking without reading another book or listening to another podcast. Your brain spends all day answering questions. Most people simply never notice the questions they're asking. Habit 3. Ask your brain a better question. Imagine 2 different mornings. In the first one, you wake up thinking, how am I going to get through everything today? Your brain immediately starts searching for evidence that the day will be overwhelming. Now imagine waking up and asking, what's one thing I could do today that would make tonight feel easier? It's a completely different question, which means your brain starts searching for completely different answers. This isn't positive thinking, it's how attention naturally works. Your brain is constantly filtering enormous amounts of information. The questions you ask become instructions for what your mind should notice. If you've ever bought a new car and suddenly started seeing that same model everywhere, you've experienced this phenomenon. The cars were always there. Your brain simply started looking for them. The same thing happens with your thoughts. Ask, why am I always distracted? Your brain happily provides examples. Ask, what helps me focus longer than usual? Now it starts looking for successful patterns instead. One of the simplest morning habits you can build is writing down one useful question before your day begins. Not something impossible, not something philosophical. Something your brain can quietly work on in the background. Questions like, what usually makes me procrastinate after lunch? What conversation have I been avoiding? How could I make my workspace 10% easier to use? The fascinating part is your brain often keeps working on these questions even when you aren't consciously thinking about them. That's why solutions sometimes appear while you're driving, walking the dog, or washing dishes. Your brain doesn't stop processing simply because you've shifted your attention elsewhere. Give it a worthwhile question, and it'll often return with surprisingly creative answers. And that's exactly where the next habit begins. Because if the quality of your questions shapes your attention, the timing of your rewards shapes your self-control. And most people accidentally train their brain in the opposite direction every single morning. Habit 4. Delay your first reward. I want you to try this experiment. Think about the first enjoyable thing you experience on a typical morning. For some people, it's scrolling social media. For others, it's watching YouTube while getting ready. Maybe it's checking sports scores, reading entertainment news, or jumping into a group chat. There's nothing inherently wrong with any of those things. The question is, when they happen. Your brain is constantly learning sequences. It pays close attention to what comes before a reward because it wants to repeat whatever led to that good feeling. This is one reason habits become so automatic over time. Your brain isn't memorizing the reward. It's memorizing the path that leads to it. Now think about these 2 mornings. On the first morning, you wake up, unlock your phone, and spend 20 minutes consuming entertaining content before you've done anything that moves your life forward. On the second morning, you finish one meaningful task first. Then you enjoy your coffee, music, or favorite app without guilt. The reward is exactly the same, but your brain learns 2 completely different lessons. In the first routine, pleasure comes before progress. In the second, progress becomes the doorway to pleasure. That subtle difference changes something important. It teaches your brain that effort isn't something standing between you and enjoyment. Effort becomes part of the process that leads to enjoyment. Psychologists sometimes call this reinforcement learning. The brain naturally strengthens behaviors that are followed by positive outcomes. So instead of trying to eliminate rewards, rearrange them. Want to listen to your favorite podcast? Start it after you've finished planning your day. Love your morning latte? Enjoy it after you've completed 10 minutes of focused work. Like checking social media? Save it until after you've handled one important responsibility. This isn't about punishment. It's about changing the order. When your brain repeatedly experiences progress before pleasure, discipline slowly begins to feel less like resistance and more like routine. And once that happens, something even more interesting starts to change. You stop thinking only about what makes today easier. You begin naturally making choices that help the version of you who wakes up tomorrow. Habit 5. Give your future self one gift. Imagine walking into your kitchen tomorrow morning. The counter is clean. Your lunch is already packed. Your water bottle is filled. Your workout clothes are waiting. The report you need to finish is already open on your laptop. None of those things happened by accident. Yesterday's version of you quietly made today's life easier. We rarely think about it this way, but every day we're constantly interacting with 3 different versions of ourselves. The person we were yesterday, the person we are right now, and the person we'll become tomorrow. The problem is that most decisions favor the present version. I'll clean that later. I'll deal with it tomorrow. I'll remember. Tomorrow eventually arrives, and suddenly we're frustrated because someone left us extra work. Except that someone was us. Behavioral economists describe this as present bias. Our brains naturally give more weight to immediate comfort than future convenience. The result? We unknowingly become obstacles to our own progress. Here's a simple habit that quietly changes that relationship. Every morning, ask yourself, what's one thing I can do today that tomorrow's version of me will genuinely appreciate? Sometimes it's preparing tomorrow's breakfast. Sometimes it's laying out tomorrow's clothes. Sometimes it's organizing tomorrow's meeting notes. Sometimes it's charging every device before bed. These tasks rarely feel urgent. That's exactly why they're powerful. They reduce future friction before it appears. Think about airports for a moment. The busiest airports don't run smoothly because they're constantly solving emergencies. They run smoothly because thousands of small decisions prevent emergencies from happening in the first place. Successful mornings work the same way. You're not simply completing chores, you're designing tomorrow. And here's something fascinating. Every time your future self benefits from something you prepared earlier, your brain strengthens a new identity. I'm someone who looks after myself. That's a much more powerful belief than simply thinking you're organized, because identity lasts longer than motivation. Now, there's another habit that sounds almost unproductive. In fact, many people avoid it because it feels like they're wasting time. Ironically, it may be one of the best things you can do for creative thinking. Habit 6. Practice 1 minute of intentional boredom. When was the last time you stood in line without reaching for your phone? Or sat on your porch without listening to anything? Or drank your coffee without simultaneously consuming information? For many people, it's hard to remember. Modern life has quietly removed almost every empty moment. Waiting becomes scrolling. Walking becomes podcasts. Breakfast becomes YouTube. Driving becomes phone calls. The brain is always receiving, almost never wandering. Neuroscientists have found that when the brain isn't focused on an external task, a network known as the default mode network becomes more active. This network is associated with reflection, memory, connecting ideas, planning the future, and even creative problem solving. Interestingly, some of your best ideas don't appear while you're concentrating. They appear after you've stopped forcing yourself to think. Have you ever remembered someone's name halfway through a shower? Or suddenly solved a work problem during a walk? That's not coincidence. Your brain was still working in the background. It simply needed enough mental space to connect the pieces. The problem is that many of us interrupt this process before it can happen. The second our mind becomes quiet, we fill it. One notification, one article, one more video, one more email. It's like constantly interrupting someone who's trying to finish a sentence. Tomorrow morning, try something unusual. For just 1 minute, do absolutely nothing. No phone, no music, no podcast, no journal, no meditation app telling you how to meditate. Simply sit, look out the window, notice the weather, watch people walking outside. Let your thoughts drift without chasing them. At first, it might feel uncomfortable. Your brain has become accustomed to constant stimulation. But after a few days, something interesting begins to happen. Ideas start arriving without effort. Conversations become easier to process. Problems seem slightly less tangled. You're giving your brain something that's becoming surprisingly rare in modern life: silence. And that silence prepares your brain for one final habit. It's arguably the most powerful one in the entire video because it changes the way you see yourself. Not just your morning, your identity. And once your identity changes, success begins feeling automatic instead of something you have to force every single day. Habit 7. Collect an identity win before 8 a.m. Here's a question that's easy to overlook. When do you usually feel successful? For many people, it's at the end of the day. After finishing a project. After getting praise from a boss. After seeing good numbers. After crossing everything off a to-do list. The problem is that all of those moments depend on something outside your immediate control. Other people can interrupt your work. Meetings can run long. Unexpected problems appear. By the time evening arrives, it's easy to feel like the day got away from you, even if you worked hard. Now imagine starting the day differently. Imagine that before 8 a.m., you've already done something that confirms the kind of person you want to become. Not something impressive, something intentional. Maybe you sat down and wrote for 15 minutes. Maybe you practiced a language. Maybe you reviewed your finances instead of avoiding them. Maybe you spent 10 focused minutes learning a new skill. Maybe you finally made that phone call you've been postponing. Notice what all of these have in common. They aren't about checking off chores, they're evidence. Your brain is constantly asking a quiet question. What kind of person am I? Most of us think the answer comes from our beliefs. In reality, it comes from our behavior. If every morning begins with distraction, your brain slowly gathers evidence that distraction is normal. If every morning begins with avoidance, your brain starts expecting avoidance tomorrow too. But if every morning includes one meaningful action that aligns with the person you want to become, your brain starts building a different story. Not because you repeated an affirmation, because you collected proof. Psychologists often describe identity as something reinforced through repeated experiences. Every action becomes a vote for the type of person you believe yourself to be. Think about someone who says, "I'm not really a reader." If they read 10 pages every morning for 6 months, something interesting happens. At some point, they stop saying they're trying to read more. They simply become someone who reads. The same thing happens with discipline. People often assume disciplined individuals wake up feeling motivated. Many don't. They've simply accumulated so many identity wins that the behavior feels familiar. Imagine a pilot preparing for takeoff. Before the plane leaves the ground, they complete a checklist. Not because each individual step is extraordinary, but because every small action increases the chances of a successful flight. Your morning works the same way. You're not trying to accomplish everything before breakfast. You're simply giving your brain one clear piece of evidence that says, this is who we are. The beauty of an identity win is that it doesn't have to be big. In fact, it's often better if it's small enough that you almost can't fail. Because consistency teaches the brain more than intensity ever will. And the surprising part is, once you've collected that first meaningful win, the next good decision often becomes easier. You protect your attention a little better, you procrastinate a little less, you recover from distractions a little faster. Not because the morning magically changed your life, because it changed the direction your brain was already moving. Why these morning habits feel different? If you've noticed something about these 7 habits, it's that none of them require extraordinary discipline. None of them depend on waking up at 4:30 in the morning. None of them require buying another productivity app. None of them ask you to completely redesign your life overnight. Instead, they all do something much quieter. They change the environment your brain learns from. That's an important distinction. Most people try to force better behavior, but your brain is always asking a simpler question. What's normal around here? If your normal morning begins by borrowing someone else's thoughts, tolerating small frustrations, rewarding yourself before making progress, and constantly filling every quiet moment with stimulation, your brain adapts to that, not because it's lazy, because it's efficient. Brains are prediction machines. They automate whatever happens often enough, which means success rarely becomes automatic because of one life-changing decision. It becomes automatic because you've repeated enough small behaviors that your brain stops treating them as decisions. Think about learning to drive. At first, every movement required conscious effort. Checking mirrors, using the turn signal, watching speed, braking smoothly. It felt overwhelming. Years later, you can drive home while carrying on a conversation because your brain has automated thousands of tiny actions. The same thing happens with success. People often look at someone who's calm, organized, and consistent and assume they possess unusual discipline. More often, they've simply practiced useful patterns until those patterns became automatic. That's encouraging news, because it means you don't need to become a completely different person tomorrow morning. You only need to give your brain better patterns to repeat. The morning that quietly changes everything. Tomorrow morning will probably look ordinary. You'll wake up, walk into the kitchen, brush your teeth, get dressed, maybe head to work, maybe work from home. Nothing dramatic. But hidden inside those ordinary moments are dozens of opportunities to teach your brain something. You can begin with someone else's priorities, or your own. You can step over tiny problems, or remove them. You can ask questions that create stress, or questions that create solutions. You can chase an immediate reward, or let progress earn it. You can leave extra work for tomorrow, or give your future self a gift. You can fill every second with noise, or leave room for your mind to think. And before the morning is over, you can collect one small piece of evidence that reminds your brain exactly who you're becoming. None of these habits will transform your life in a single day. That's not how brains work. But repeated often enough, they change something much more valuable than a single day. They change what your brain expects from you. And once your brain starts expecting consistency, discipline begins to feel less like effort and more like who you are. That's the real goal, not forcing success. Teaching your brain until success feels natural. If you found this video genuinely useful and it gave you at least one idea you'll try tomorrow morning, consider giving it a like. And if you're interested in practical, science-backed ideas that help you train your mind and build a better life, subscribe to Simple Ways of Life. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.